Hello, everyone. We'll be starting in just a moment. Please be patient. And if you wouldn't mind checking in your chat box while we wait. And if you would introduce yourself and tell us where you were joining from. Amazing group of attendees in the chat. So just a reminder, just introduce yourself. Let us know where you're joining us from. Looks like we've got folks from the mountains to the coast today. We'll open up the webinar in just 1 minute. We've still got some folks joining us. That number continues to climb. We'll give everybody a chance to get everything set up for audio. Thanks again for being here. If you wouldn't mind introducing yourself in the chat box, let us know where you're from. All right, we have reached a critical mass. We're going to go ahead and begin the program. Hi, everybody. I'm Terry Lansdale, Director of Bike Walk North Carolina. I'm going to ask folks to make sure they give a thumbs up or a confirmation that their sound is okay in the chat box. Super. Thanks very much. All right. Welcome to Bike Walk North Carolina's first ever virtual summit. We had planned to have an in-person summit in Durham this year, but things have changed the world during these past 6 or 8 months. And we're glad that we could shift accordingly and bring this to you in a virtual setting and provide you an incredible resource of information about how to make biking, walking, and active transportation safer in North Carolina. To begin this official part of the summit, I want to introduce our Bike Walk North Carolina board chair, Ted Silver, to start us off with some opening remarks. So Ted, I'm going to pin your video and let you start the show.
Good morning. I want to welcome you to the Bike Walk NC Virtual Summit. My name is Ted Silver, and I've got the privilege of being your president. Obviously, if you can see, I'm taking a plug for Lees McRae College. I'm the program coordinator and adjunct professor for the country's only academic cycling studies minor degree, and I'm chair of the Banner Elk, North Carolina Bike Ped Committee. I just want to point out that having watched the list on the chat of who is here, I think this virtual summit has given us an opportunity to really reach out in a wide range across the state to provide the information. Obviously, if you can hear me or see me, I can count on you, and Bike Walk NC can count on you as a supporter and interested advocate, adding your voice to the state efforts, and continue as a learner to promote safety, diversity, improve climate, and a better infrastructure for all of North Carolina, and especially to be active in your community. As you saw the list of sponsors, we want to especially thank all of them for jumping in, the speakers and the League of American Bicyclists for lending their expertise, and better yet, to make this summit a success. I want to give a special thanks to the gentleman, our Executive Director, Terry Lansdale, and Heidi Perf for their beyond efforts to put on this virtual summit. And along with the Board of Directors, Simon Walker, and the Durham Committee for everything that's been done. Please enjoy your membership that you've gotten. Be on the lookout for our calls for action. And please continue to help make Bike Walk NC and yourself a voice and stakeholder in your community for our infrastructure and active transportation. Thank you for attending.
Thank you, Ted. I really appreciate that. We also want to remind folks that this year's summit centered around the importance of equity in transportation. We do have live closed captioning available for all our webinars and sessions during this 3-day conference. So please, if you need it, click the closed caption tab at the bottom of your toolbar, and you can join us via closed caption as well as video and audio as you need. Next up, I want to do a quick video from the North Carolina Department of Transportation.
Good morning, everyone. I am Commissioner Sig Hutchinson, and we are so fortunate to have North Carolina Department of Transportation Secretary Eric Boyette with us here this morning. We are here at the beautiful North Carolina Museum of Art. Mr. Secretary, we are here to celebrate the 9th annual North Carolina Bike Walk Summit. It's virtual this year, so the Secretary wanted to be with us to share a message about what bicycling and walking means to him. So, Mr. Secretary, thank you for being with us here today.
Thank you, Sig. Thank you. Glad to be here on a beautiful day in North Carolina.
It's gorgeous. It's gorgeous. Now, Mr. Secretary, I understand that bicycling and walking has very significant meaning to you.
Yes, sir.
Could you talk about why biking and walking is a personal thing for you?
Yes, sir. So, Sig, as a youth, you think about, that freedom. I always enjoyed walking, but when I knew I could have a bicycle, when I first had that first bike, I got there faster. That little country store I could go to and get that cold Pepsi, it meant a lot to me. It meant a lot to have that freedom. And it's just something that, you enjoy the outdoors. You can get outside. There's things you can do, to get out of the house. There's things that helps you health, But, as you grow, you also continue to see, other modes of transportation. But the bike and, the head piece of North Carolina is very important for us. Yes. And to me personally, I just remember those days. It just reminds me of that first freedom that I had as a youth.
I want to thank you very much. Thank everybody at NCDOT. Thank you, Sig Hutchinson and others who helped make this happen. Very nice to have the Secretary of Transportation in his first 30 days of the job welcome us to the 9th annual Bike Walk North Carolina Summit, and also become a sponsor for us. So without further ado, I want to make sure we begin our program as timely as possible. Some extra housekeeping needed to be done and welcoming needed to be done before Warren Logan joins us. As a brief introduction, Warren serves as the Policy Director of Mobility and Interagency Relations for the Mayor's Office of Oakland, California, which is one of the first cities to implement a slow streets program after the pandemic began. Warren works closely with the city's Department of Transportation, Public Works Department, and other Bay Area public agencies to develop strategies that advance the city's vision for safe and sustainable transportation for everyone. I've been lucky enough to hear and read several of Warren's talks in the past few months, so I know we are in for a real treat at Bike Walk North Carolina. A quote from an article I read in Medium said this about our speaker. Often urbanists can focus on the technical and the literal, but Logan pushes us to focus on the human. Instead of charts and graphs, Logan goes deeper in his work to understand how people are interacting with public spaces. He also pushes us to pull anti-racism into the work we are doing every day, rather than seeing it as a box to check, rather than adding equity on top. How do we bring it into our everyday work is his goal. If you have questions, please put them in the chat box. We'll get to as many as we can at the end of the talk, and we'll transfer them on to Warren after the talk. So if there's anything urgent that he didn't get to, he'll be able to respond to that. With that, I'm going to go ahead and begin the process to turn it over to Warren. And welcome. Thanks very much for being here today, Warren.
Thank you so much, Terry. It's great to be here. And good morning to all of you out in North Carolina. And hello from not very sunny Oakland yet. I'm very excited to be here to talk about our slow streets and about the programs that we've been running. So let me go ahead and share my screen and I'll begin my presentation. All right. So good morning, everyone. Again, I am Warren Logan, just as Terry shared, and those are beautiful comments that I'm curious now where you heard those, and I'm sorry that you probably read so much about me. Like Terry said, I am the Mayor's Policy Director of Mobility and Interagency Relations, and in that role, I do work with the Department of Transportation to deliver major projects throughout the city. And again, at the same time, I work closely to collaborate with other public agencies that either are located in Oakland or provide services here. What's interesting is that during the city's declared emergency for COVID-19, I also served in our emergency operations group, and I'm the city's lead for partnering with the County of Department of Public Health to develop targeted testing sites throughout the city. And that will come up shortly, in fact. Today, I'd like to spend some time talking about Oakland's Slow Streets program, and I'll share our lessons learned, our successes, and our challenges, mostly challenges, I would say. I want to also discuss how our work centers around community engagement, building trust, and, as Terry mentioned, advancing racial equity. I will let you know that I have a small puppy running around me, so if I look distracted, it's not you guys. I always like to share what my key takeaways are going to be at the beginning of my presentation, so make sure to be on the lookout for the next 5 themes. The first is that the City of Oakland and the Department of Transportation specifically is a team, and our work is not possible really without some amazing and dedicated, nimble staff members. Second, Oakland is not perfect. I'm gonna say that again, Oakland is not perfect. We have had a lot of work to, and we have a lot of work to complete ahead of us. Every city is a little different, and so I want to caution all of you to avoid taking what I share as gospel and copying and pasting it in your city. Third, and probably one of the most important things you'll learn today, is that people of color are not a monolith. I have my own opinions and biases, and you shouldn't take what I share as the voice of every Black person. 4, in Oakland, we are learning to ask a simple question during engagement: why? We ask why again and again until we get to the root of the issue. 5th and final, it's important to be honest and to admit when you've made a mistake. So with that in mind, let's talk about Oakland slow streets. Rewinding to April, which is just 7 months away and probably what feels like 7 years for many of us, Mayor of Oakland, Libby Schaaf, announced the Slow Streets program on a citywide town hall with several thousand listeners. I want to give a little context about what brought us to that decision in April, so let's rewind just a little bit farther. In the months ahead of COVID outbreak, Oakland had a number of extremely high-profile pedestrian collisions. In one situation, a mother was picking up her kids from school and was actually hit and killed. School had just been let out, and as you can imagine, many of the students, teachers, and other parents literally saw the tragedy in front of them. And it was incredibly traumatic, and our East Oakland parents were demanding swift action to keep their kids safe. Fast forward to the beginning of the pandemic, a high number of families are beginning shelter in place and are choosing to congregate at the city's recently renovated Lake Merritt parks. In fact, they're quite beautiful. We were receiving countless calls from neighbors around the lake sharing pretty obvious concerns about the spread of COVID and the lack of access to open space in Oakland. And lastly, because traffic had all but disappeared on our streets, and I'm sure many of you experienced this too, for the few that remained, some of those chose this as an opportunity to use our streets as a raceway, leaving many in greater fear of collision. So setting that as some context, we announced that all of Oakland's neighborhood bikeways, a total of 74 miles, which is about 10% of our streets in the city, would soon be closed to through traffic. And in place of cars, we wanted to encourage our residents to stretch their legs, enjoy the California sun, and really greet their neighbors with hopefully some distance in between them, right? Those 74 miles of neighborhood bikeways and soon to be slow streets were selected directly from our recently adopted 2019 bicycle master plan called Let's Bike Oakland. That plan included thousands of hours of community engagement, wherein a number of residents shared with us quite directly that they didn't feel comfortable riding bikes or even walking in their neighborhoods, and are even less comfortable doing so on major streets. So that plan included a network of neighborhood bikeways as a proposed solution. Directly following the mayor's announcement, our DOT street team went to work installing the first 5 slow streets throughout the city with A-frame barricades, which you see here. We placed these signs strategically at intersections where faster street traffic would otherwise turn sharply and dangerously onto slow neighborhood streets. In many cases, these were also documented as places where people had historically been hit by cars. So we were using data to inform these decisions. Not only did the signs include information about the Slow Streets program, we also included information about how to get free COVID tests, which was the other program I was running at the time. On the back of every sign, we also included information about the 2020 census as well. Now, about 24 hours later from launching the program, we got a lot of feedback. Excuse me. In our more affluent communities, people love them. We saw people strolling and jogging and playing on neighborhood streets. And in these neighborhoods, the slow streets were working just as intended. In our East Oakland neighborhoods, a very different story was playing out. And this is in fact sort of the focus of my presentation today. I received a phone call from one of our constituents who asked me point blank, is this a trick to get Black people to expose themselves to COVID? Are you trying to kill us? Others shared that their streets still weren't safe enough to play in, and this program wasn't worth our time. Of course, a lot of people shared that they should have been consulted first. And a few people emailed to say that they didn't really want bike lanes on their streets, which incidentally was not what we were doing for this program. Lastly, and this is sort of important too, a lot of people said, this doesn't look like our street. This doesn't look like my street. I will share with you, those first 2 weeks were really, really tough. And honestly, we thought about canceling the program or rolling it back. Or maybe just taking the slow streets out of East Oakland altogether and leaving them in North Oakland. And our project managers came back to me, in those first couple of weeks and said, our East Oakland advocates are furious and asked us to take the slow streets out of their neighborhoods. And I asked them if they understood why. And they shared a whole host of reasons, and I pushed for more. I genuinely didn't believe that the same people who were furious that we weren't moving fast enough in February were now equally angry because we'd moved too fast. I also refuse to believe that anyone would actively campaign against safer streets on their own, at least not without some underlying rationale. So we started a dialogue. we reached out to some of the key advocacy groups in East Oakland and asked them to meet. In the first couple of meetings, we're mostly venting, but we finally started getting to the heart of some of the issues. And again, we'll kind of work through those today. I want to pause here and share a dynamic that was especially challenging for our team. Several of our project managers are white, and the advocates I'm talking about are all Black. And for a department that prides itself on advancing racial equity, this dynamic was exceptionally challenging to that focus. Our team told me privately that they didn't feel comfortable asking those deeper questions, and instead were effectively collecting what we ultimately found to be pretty superficial feedback. So I jumped in and started participating in the meetings as well. I shouted back. I asked why. No, but why? And what ultimately came of the first conversations was a commitment to address a prevailing community need during those first weeks and months of COVID-19 shelter in place: access to essential places. There were people who couldn't get to grocery stores, they couldn't get to the clinics, to testing facilities, and they needed help. So we launched a sub-program called Essential Places. We're very creative with our names here. Slow Streets Essential Places was another pretty simple, quick build program. We worked with the advocates to identify key places, and then we set up posts, cones, and signs to help slow traffic and help people cross the street more safely. I think Essential Places accomplished two goals. For one, we were addressing a safety need that the community shared with us. People could literally get to essential places. For many transportation planners like us, we'd call that increasing access to community resources. The deeper goal, though, was to rebuild trust. And you heard me talk about that at the top of my conversation here. Our team listened to feedback, acknowledged we were not meeting the community's needs, and prove that we would take those requests seriously. And that's something you don't typically hear from the government. And I'm gonna say government in big brackets here, right? Admitting a mistake and trying something different than coming back for feedback again. That's what we did. And several of the members of our working group shared with me more recently that they may not agree with the Slow Streets program in general still, which we're working on, but appreciated that we kept listening and kept trying. We kept showing up for the conversation. Now let's turn to another aspect of feedback we received. These don't look like our streets. The issue of community ownership is critical for many and probably all transportation projects. And there was something especially controversial about limiting access to drivers without much clarity about who was welcome then on those streets and what they should be using the streets for, if not for driving. Our team wasn't sure at first how to address this feedback. These aren't our streets. We can't even tell they're slow streets. How are we supposed to feel welcomed? One aspect that made distinguishing slow streets from any other street was that we use generic construction barricades. And these are the same barricades that were used for everything, including basic repaving, curb cut improvements, and most importantly, the East Bay Bus Rapid Transit line that was also under construction. And to put a bow on all of that, this was a bus rapid transit project that spanned the entire length of East Oakland and had drawn and still draws some pretty significant criticism because of its pretty awful construction impacts that we're now going to have to work through. So to address this issue, our team applied for a National Endowment of the Arts Award through the Smart Growth America program, and we scored the best among almost 200 applicants. We worked with an East Oakland artist. In fact, we selected one who was originally against the program, and he helped create these beautiful planter boxes that could be community gardens and used iconography that better represented the community. I want to turn now to some of the deepest lessons our team learned during the last 7 months. Let's talk about the feedback I heard the most. Slow streets aren't working, so remove them. I don't believe people, and I said this earlier, I don't believe people who say they don't want safe streets. I believe they're saying something deeper, and it's our job to figure out what that is. And I found that the last 5 years or so, planners have started focusing more and more on equity. But I think for some, that means going to Black and brown communities, listening to the first response as gospel, and then running to reverse course because they were yelled at. So let's start with the baseline understanding that people want safe streets, and it's a matter of how we accomplish that end goal. Slow streets aren't working. For many, slow streets should look like people jogging around and enjoying time with their kids in the middle of the street. And if you don't see that happening on your block, and at the same time, people are still driving by pretty quickly, that can be a sign of failure. And deeper than that, people are saying they don't feel any safer than before. And just as an aside, and I think this is an important statistic for everybody listening, Oakland slow streets have actually had 0 collisions, injuries, or deaths, which statistically is a really significant improvement given that many of these slow streets are representative of our high injury network. And I think we should focus on what isn't being said here. There's something a lot deeper than this isn't working, so just go away. So I had a number of conversations with colleagues of mine, also Black city planners, and I asked kind of to myself really, like, am I wrong? Like, what am I missing here? This really should be working. And I wanted it to work so badly. And many of us, I think, experience the same challenge in our day-to-day work. So one of my closest friends messaged me privately and said, you'd be mad too, wouldn't you? And I really was floored. And I did some soul searching and I started to see it. I really saw what they saw. So here's what's in between on this slide. Here's what's in between, it's not working, go away. And for everybody listening, this is the punchline of my speech, I guess. The program you've launched in our neighborhood dismisses, one, the fact that the reckless people who are driving so fast in East Oakland are way more dangerous than some basic barricade can address. Two, given the historic, like extremely historic disinvestment and lack of meaningful capital improvement in those neighborhoods, in East Oakland, right? People, why would we believe you'll be willing to actually do what it takes to really make our streets safer after we've said this isn't working, right? Three, given the historic displacement of people of color to neighborhoods without strong transit service and greater distances from high resource areas, right? People of color are then forced to drive, not by choice, but by necessity. So you can understand then making it harder for residents to drive might feel like another insult. So all of that taken together, people might then say, why bother talking about it with you when it's going to just be a waste of time and will only further like my distrust in government? Now, here's what we do about it. And make no mistake, slow streets cannot fix institutional racism. And I'm gonna repeat that again. Slow streets cannot fix institutional racism or a century of disinvestment in Black and brown communities. But that doesn't mean we can't help, right? We can start the conversation here though. First, speeding is so bad that people feel hopeless. So let's work on that, right? If the barricades aren't working, let's try something that will. So next week, in fact, and I had to time my speech so I knew exactly what my announcement would be. Next week, we're actually going to be rolling out stronger barricades with signs from our sign shop that actually include our East Oakland artist iconography. So we have literally created an aluminum sign that looks like an official traffic sign, but it is with the same typography, the same art, stenciled from our East Oakland artists. Second, there's a historic disinvestment, like I said, in so many Black and brown communities across the country that will take decades of perseverance to reverse. And so what Oakland did was our capital improvement program just finished its first round of engagement. Our timing could not have been better, I guess. And we've especially targeted East Oakland neighborhoods with special assistance to help them get to the top of the list, right? Not just allowing people to say what they want, but then helping them package the programs they need in a way that's going to score the highest through our system. So we're leveraging the relationships we've been building through our Slow Streets program to encourage more people to get involved. Third, and this is really important, you cannot give up. Every time planners get feedback and run away from Black and brown communities, we further solidify that past trauma. we really have to be willing to do the work to fix the deeper issues. And so for slow streets, we just kept showing up for the conversation. And this was really hard. And I said this earlier, we almost closed the program. No one likes feeling constant criticism, but I think we demonstrated that we really wanted to learn from past mistakes and make meaningful progress towards our shared values. None of this could have been possible if we didn't ask a simple question: why? Without that simple question, Oakland Slow Streets program might be in a very different place today, or may not even exist. But our team persevered to find deeper understanding with our neighbors and to acknowledge some really painful histories about our city and about our profession. And that's important, about our profession especially. I challenge all of you to do the same, to always ask why, to admit when you've made a mistake, and to work as a team to fix historic traumas. We owe it to ourselves and to our cities to strive for safe and equitable streets for everybody. Thank you for listening to my speech. And I'm going to take questions now. And in fact, I can see some of them. Terry, do you want me to just take the questions from the chat?
Sure. I think Richie's been dropping you some questions in the chat. So let's see. Yeah, go ahead.
Sure. So hold on just a second. So kind of working backwards. Sure. So I see from Heidi, I'll answer Heidi's question first. I can talk a little bit more about engagement. So we were really fortunate to actually have just completed our Let's Bike Oakland Bicycle Master Plan, like at the end of last year. So a lot of the people that we needed to engage with were just a phone call away, a text message away. And so we set up a number of Zoom working groups, and I'll share one of the critical things that we did was we actually split our working group into two. One group was our traditional transportation advocates, who were the ones that were like, this program should be permanent, let's do this every day, all day. And we separated those from the East Oakland advocates, the primarily Black city residents of Oakland, to kind of highlight what they were experiencing so that we weren't missing the underlying story. I genuinely believe that had we put them together, we wouldn't have really heard the underlying issues. And what's also kind of important about that group was none of them are transportation planners. None of them are even transportation advocates. One of them is a healthy food distributor. One is a cultural, actually two are cultural groups. Another is more of a citywide community health program. But all of these folks understood what it was like to live in East Oakland. And again, understood the history of the city that we were really working in and the neighborhoods we were working in. And so that really underpinned the type of engagement that we did. Every week, senior members of the Department of Transportation, including myself and the other deputy of the DOT, gave hours of our time to listen in. And I think that that's also kind of important, is like who shows up to the meeting, right? We're not just sending our most junior staff, we're sending the director, right? To really listen, and then the next week to say, okay, you told us to do X, we're doing that, right? And I think that that's really important. Hold on, next question. Yeah, so Rishi kind of shared if I could dig a little bit deeper into getting to the root of community concerns. So I'm actually going to revisit something I said earlier about people saying, slow streets aren't working, get rid of them. Like that's literally what people said to me over and over again. And these were also the same people that if I scrolled back in my text chain with them had just said, why aren't you working faster to fix my streets? And so I told them, I was like, I don't fully, like, I'm not understanding what you're telling me. And so there was actually an argument that I got into like weeks into one of our Zoom meetings where one of the advocates was actually Zooming on her phone and walking down one of our slow streets, kind of yelling at us saying, see, look, this isn't working. I don't know why you guys are doing this. You guys need to come and, you know, pick up these signs and just kind of do away with the program. And so I actually I was like, okay, so everybody stop. I'm going to take what you just said, and here's what I heard. Remove all of the slow streets from East Oakland, leave the slow streets in North Oakland. And just so everyone's kind of aware of the geography of Oakland, in fact, there's a map of it right behind me. North Oakland is far more affluent and whiter than East Oakland. East Oakland is far more low income than pretty much a big significant portion of the East Bay, depending on where you are. And so I told her, I was like, okay, we're just gonna remove the slow streets because you said so. And she said, you know, that's not what I'm saying. And I was like, you just told me to remove the program. So I told you that I would do so, and now you're saying that that's not what you want. And so we just kind of kept at it. I was like, if that's not what you're telling me, or if that's not what you're meaning to tell me, then we need to use different words to get at the heart of what you're trying to share. And so she was literally walking back to the signs and said, you see how these signs don't make any sense, right? Like, you see that they're not blocking anybody from traffic. Like, the program that you've launched isn't addressing the problem that you're trying to solve. And I told her, okay, well then, do you want me to change the barricades? Do you want me to change the signs? Like, let's be really specific. And that's when we finally got to one of those places where it was like, aha, you're not telling me to get rid of the program. You're saying that you don't trust me to fix what's missing. So it's almost like this trauma that's being reverted back to me, right? That's saying, you know, it's not worth having this conversation because I don't trust that you're really going to fix the problem. And, you know, fortunately, this conversation was about 2 months ago, and that's when we started ordering all these much larger, you know, sturdier barricades. We're going to drill them into the ground. In fact, just yesterday afternoon, we were talking about the schematics for like exactly where we were going to drill. A number of other people have actually asked, like, what are the other ways that we engage with community members? And I think this is actually kind of cool about the program. First, we launched a survey that we got thousands of people to respond to. But again, and this is what was so telling about some of our engagement practices that now looking back needed to be addressed. We got tons of people across the city sharing their feedback positively about the Slow Streets program. The challenge, though, was that while we had geographic equity, we did not have socioeconomic or racial equity. The people who were in each of the neighborhoods saying how much they loved the program were not representative of their neighborhood necessarily. So the next thing we did was we put out our staff on those slow streets and just waited for people to walk by with a really, really big board and had little Post-it dots, because, you know, physical distance, and asked people to share their opinions, and we collected information that way. A third way was that our city has a 311 system where you can just call in and ask questions or give feedback. And so we created a whole tree just for slow streets. So that was another way that we did that. We really tried to just open up and hear from everybody any way we could. The other thing was, so I have a Twitter account. Some of you might know that. And ODOT, our Oakland Department of Transportation, also has a Twitter account. So we actually regularly scrape the hashtags for Oakland slow streets at Oakland, at ODOT, me, and culled together all of the feedback from there. And so, like, I'm making a list here, right? And we took all of the emails we received and sort of tried to figure that out as well. And this is the really cool thing that I would encourage you all to use as well. There's a program called Hustle that is typically used for campaigning. And many of you have probably received text messages like this in the last, 36 hours. We created a text thread that you could text us if you had feedback about slow streets. And so we would spit out a survey, one question at a time, using that text message. So you would just, I think it was like, you type 3388, I think was the number, and and then you'd say slow streets, and it would ask you a question one at a time. And that was another way. So literally we were trying to find every single way to reach people, like however we could, despite the fact that I can't have a public meeting with 100 people in one room, which frankly, I don't really enjoy, and most people don't enjoy either. John, I see your sub question here, which is, how did we collect demographic information? We literally just asked people for their socioeconomic background, what zip code they lived in. They also shared what neighborhood they were in within that zip code, and then their family income, whether or not they owned a car, and whether or not they were essential workers. And that is where we really started to realize that there were a lot of people who were like, I'm not jogging in the middle of the day because I got to go to work. And so that's when the Essential Places program started to really kick in.
Warren, excuse me, there have been a couple questions about speed enforcement and whether speed enforcement goes hand in hand with design and signage changes. And then on top of that, whether that creates new issues in places where inequitable law enforcement has gone hand in hand with speed enforcement.
Yeah, that's a really important question. And I probably should have shared that at the top of my presentation, which is that when the mayor announced the Slow Streets program, she also shared that the police department and our traffic safety group within that would not be enforcing the program at all. And on one hand, a lot of people said, well, how's this going to work if you're not enforcing it? And on the other hand, a lot of people said, well, at least you're not sending more police into our streets to cause conflict. The major goal of this program from a design standpoint was to create a self-enforcing program, right? Like the barricades are literally in your way. And even if you drive around them, you have to wait for a car to pass you because the intersections are just not big enough anymore for you to drive as recklessly. The next set of barricades are going to be even bigger and you can't move them. So that was something that we've been taking very seriously, is that, and I think for many of you who probably, we all kind of grew up with the 5 E's of Vision Zero, one of them being enforcement. We're all really having to wrestle with the fact that that cannot be the first E, right? Like, I think from a design standpoint, I wouldn't say we've gotten lazy, but that we rely so heavily on filling the gaps of our design or our signs with enforcement, right? I'm going to design a street that tells me to speed, but I'm going to put a sign up that says 25 miles per hour, right? And if the sign isn't doing it, then I'm going to send a police officer out there to enforce that issue. And like, those two things can't go hand in hand. You have to design the street that you want so that people get the message without there being a badge and a gun, right? That message, I think, really helped calm a lot of people down. But I will share with you again, that this distrust, right, is that, and keep in mind, Slow Streets span the last 7 months, right? So like a lot of other things have happened during the same time, including several protests about police interaction with Black people. And so you can imagine people kind of pointing to Slow Streets, people pointing to George Floyd, people pointing to Oakland Police Department, which I will say respectfully does not have the best reputation, right? And saying, okay, how do we reconcile that you're telling me one thing here, but you're showing me something else? And again, and this is sort of one of my major takeaways was, we just had to keep showing that we were serious, right? And sort of like the show don't tell. I see a number of questions here about gentrification in Oakland, and I want to start. I always share the following polemic here, which is that when people say gentrification, I think they mean physical displacement, right? Like ultimately, where people really feel gentrification is that they are kicked out of their homes because the development is coming in. I think that that's one of the most common ways that people reconcile that image in their head. But there are two other forms of gentrification that people often that are not able to talk about, which is one, social displacement. The people who are moving into my neighborhood don't look like me, and I am worried that I am now becoming the other. And kind of back to our discussion about police, I'm worried that those people might see me as a threat and call the police, and then I am made to believe that I'm the unsafe person in my neighborhood. The third form of gentrification, I'll say, is economic displacement, which is that I can afford my rent, but the small market that used to be here where I grocery shop is now a Whole Foods, right? And I can't afford Whole Foods. And so I share that as sort of a baseline, because at the top of our program, a number of people said, you're just gentrifying East Oakland with these slow streets. And so now how are, everyone's going to get kicked out of their homes. And I will say that that's false. Fundamentally, I do not believe that people move around Oakland for bike lanes. They move around Oakland for safe neighborhoods and for homes that meet their needs. That is not to say that I'm dismissing the relationship, a very clear relationship between multi-million-dollar capital improvements that in fact may include transportation improvements and people's willingness to move to different neighborhoods. Those are totally connected. What I challenge is that when people say that making streets safer is gentrification, connecting those two in that way is actually causing you to then say, well, I guess we can't make the streets safer. And that's racist, right? Like the result you get from putting those two things at odds, right, is that you then can't improve neighborhood streets in Black and brown communities because you're going to gentrify them. And that is not a place that we can work from, because then you have a bunch of people who are, yelling at the policy director saying, why is it that people keep getting hit by cars, right? So reconciling those two issues is going to be really important for all of our work, right? It's not a matter of whether you're going to make the streets safer, I think it's how, right? It is not uncommon that my engineers will say, let's add a bike lane as a way to narrow the street. Fundamentally, that is one of the fastest practices to slow a street down, is to literally just narrow it. But what people in these neighborhoods are seeing is you're putting a bike lane here and that's not for me, right? So a number of folks, I live in West Oakland, which is the other, in fact, it's like right here on my map. I live in West Oakland, which is another predominantly Black neighborhood in Oakland. And then East Oakland has shared the same values as well, is that they're like, if you're going to narrow the street, can you provide more space for walking? People here love to walk, but there's no place to walk, right? There are ways to still get at the same goals, but we need to look more creatively at how to accomplish that without using tools that trigger people into feeling like you're giving a solution for someone who's yet to come to the neighborhood. The other part, though, is that at the end of the day, the thing that solves gentrification is investment in communities that people aren't going to feel are kicking them out, right? And fundamentally, and this is true for California, and I know quite a bit about North Carolina because my mom and most of my family is from North Carolina. And I will say, just as an aside, reading everyone's places where they're from, I was like, I've been there, used to live there, so it feels a little bit like home. Is that the solution to this problem isn't going to be transportation capital improvements. Affordable housing and key avenues to home ownership is the way to resolve this disconnect. And there's no two ways around that. And so I often will encourage people to just kind of disconnect bike lanes from gentrification, because people wouldn't feel like they were going to get kicked out of their homes if they own their homes or had rent control or whatever. And so I just kind of bring that up, that we as transportation planners also have to be kind of experts in housing policy a little bit, or at least not naive to the effects that we have on a housing market. Richie, what's my next question? They're scrolling faster than I can read and talk at the same time.
No problem. We have had a couple of questions from whom I expect are transportation planners about the nuts and bolts of the barricades and
Sure.
where they're placed in the street, and then who, after placement, maintains them and checks up on them on an almost daily basis.
Yeah, that's a good question. So right now, our barricades are, well, this is a funny joke. So we created a shortage in California for orange cones and A-frame barricades. The other cities in our region are not able to use plastic A-frame barricades. They have to use, like San Francisco's using wood sawhorses, and I think Emeryville is using water walls, because like none of us can buy enough of any one of those things. So we had to make a deal, like, okay, I'm gonna pick this barricade, you pick that one. In terms of maintenance, there's actually a new tree, like I said, in our 311 system called See, Click, Fix. So if you see a barricade that's hit or pushed over or put to the side, our street team will go and fix it. The other thing is that until very recently, our parking enforcement officers were not issuing citations. And so their job during COVID-19, that, the first amount of shelter in place was just going around and fixing the barricades. So we had sort of a platoon of people kind of circling around the city, fixing them at a time. The other really critical component here is that we had an army of volunteers who lived in a lot of the neighborhoods that had slow streets and were actively helping us maintain the program. And I think that that's kind of like another lesson learned, that when you make a program that touches people's hearts and minds, right, they're willing to invest their own time to keep the program working in a way that otherwise I don't think would have been possible. So I just want to highlight the really hard work that our volunteers made as well.
That actually sparks a question that I have, which is in cities, municipalities around the country that don't have an official program. I think we've all seen examples of neighborhoods taking things into their own hands and creating this through innovative means. And so, taking off your City of Oakland hat, what do you think of those grassroots initiatives?
Can you say the beginning of your question again? Sorry, I got lost in the having to take my City of Oakland hat off.
Which is impossible.
Yeah, I was like, I don't know if that's possible.
Places where programs like Slow Streets don't officially exist, neighborhoods taking matters into their own hands and using tactical urbanism to create this themselves.
Yeah, that's a great question, Richie. And it's kind of interesting because in the backdrop of our Slow Streets program, we actually have several other creative initiatives. So before Slow Streets, remember I said that I also manage our testing program in Oakland. So we actually use city property and city streets for pop-up testing events as well. That was actually the beginning of us saying our streets should be used for something more creative. We have what's called a Flex Streets program, which a lot of people might call al fresco or shared streets or whatever for our businesses. So that's parklets, cafe dining, street closures for businesses. And 2 years ago, we launched a program called Paint the Town, where we encourage neighborhoods to paint murals on their streets as another way to kind of signify that this is a place that people need to respect and it has a lot of history to it. As those programs have evolved very quickly in the last 7 months, we found that we've had to happily transition them from city-run programs to partnerships with community leaders, where we just provide a framework for people to, take a template and then stamp it in their streets with whichever tool they need. Because in Oakland, and having seen it, all the list of the cities that are represented, Oakland might be a big city compared to many of yours, but we are a very small city compared to our neighbors in the Bay and across California. But, we have a pretty significant number of staff members in DOT, but the number of people who are running the Slow Streets program includes me, part of our safety division leader's time, her deputy, and a junior planner. There are very few people officially running this program. It is in great honor and privilege that we have so many people just out in our streets that are willing to partner with us to help. And one of the things that, as we've kind of grown into the second phase of our program, we're looking at, to your question, Richie, what are the ways in which we can enable people to just do things that are within the sandbox, right? They're going to allow them to feel like they have ownership of their streets without needing to get going through a robust permitting process, right? And then taking lots of time. And so my suggestion for those out there who are trying to figure this out without an official program is to find templates, right? The funny thing about Slow Streets, especially for the people who are not happy with the program, these are just A-frame barricades. I picked one up and put it to the side, and I was like, that's great. That's how tactical urbanism works, right? If it's not working, I can literally pick it up and move it somewhere else. And so, if I could go back and do it all over again, I would probably launch the program in a pretty similar fashion, if only because, well, obviously people were very upset with us because we just sort of launched the citywide program kind of literally overnight. It gave us something to talk about, right? I fundamentally believe that all of us struggle to use our imaginations creatively enough to imagine a world in which cars are not the prevailing factor on the streets. And we had to kind of like shake people out of that by putting a stupid plastic sign on one side of the intersection to say, maybe you don't drive so fast. And then start the conversation from there. You know, my ideal would be going back is to put the signs out and then put someone next to them and say, if you have questions, ask me. I'm literally standing right here and I want to have this conversation with you right here. I can see that my laptop is not plugged in and I thought it was. I'm going to just go plug it in really quickly so we can continue our conversation. I will be right back. This will take me 5 seconds.
No problem. If anybody has any final questions, please do type them into the chat and we will get those to Warren. Thanks everybody for your questions so far and for participating. Warren, if you can hear me, next question will be, and you've touched on this to some degree already, but it's a great question to have towards the end. What do you expect / hope will happen with slow streets once the pandemic is over? And I would like to elaborate on that a little bit and say both in Oakland and these types of creative initiatives have happened elsewhere across the country. So what do you hope the ingenuity that a pandemic started will result in?
Yeah, I think that the next phase of slow streets is going to include both stronger barricades and more community art. I think that having these partnerships is one of the most critical aspects of the program that I never want to take for granted, because without it, it's not going to work. And maybe our most significant next part is that we're actually going back to the community members and asking them, like, for lack of a better word, sort of an up or down vote to just kind of understand if we should continue. I think a number of people have shared with us that they want some version of the program to continue on past the shelter in place aspect, but I don't think that what permanent is going to look like for many people is barricades, right? And so that's the next phase of what we need to sort of figure out is like, what is the best way that people can continue to feel safe in their neighborhoods and also feel flexible, right? A number of folks shared with us that maybe slow street shouldn't be all day, every day, but that it's perhaps an opportunity to either do it in the summer, right, when kids get off of school, or just on the weekends. And that's something that I think is going to be pretty exciting, is to start kind of thinking about like all of the other more creative, not just more creative, but different creative ways to slow traffic down during times when people want to be outside.
Great. One final question, a very poignant one given the theme of our summit, which is inclusivity in transportation. The question is, do you measure any impact of your Slow Streets program on people with physical or other disabilities? If so, what are the impacts?
Yeah, that's also really critical. So we, as part of our survey, we actually specifically asked folks whether or not they said that they had a mobility challenge, and then how this program has affected them. And a number of people actually said, that it is, in part because our sidewalks don't work very well. So funny enough, it was a really cool opportunity to kind of expand the sidewalk, essentially. But I would say that one of our next challenges, and I don't know if Slow Streets is just the major fix for this, we're going to need to address the fact that our sidewalks are either not wide enough, they're not in good repair, our ramps may not even exist in some places, and that that slow streets is just one of many tools in the toolbox now for us to address this concern. The other part is that, I think people of all abilities should feel free to play in their streets, right? And that's something that just is not possible if the streets aren't traffic calmed. It's not just folks maybe in wheelchairs, but my grandparents like going to street fairs. That all of these things are now made possible when you just kind of start from a place that people should be first.
That's great. Thanks so much. We really appreciate it, Warren. We commend the work that you've been doing in Oakland and then even going beyond that to share such great information with us in North Carolina so that we can hopefully replicate it where we are. Thank you for everything you've shared with us today. Thanks for everyone who had questions and attended. And we'll virtually give Warren a hand. We haven't mastered this. I'll do it for you, David.
Thank you for the applause.
Yeah. So thanks, everybody. Our next session will begin in a little while later today. We hope to see you back. And thanks again to Warren.
Thanks, everybody. And we'll begin again at our next session at 10:30 with the Greensboro Downtown Greenway, bringing us together and setting us apart. We'll see you in just a few minutes.